Yemen's internationally recognized government is not in Yemen.
Yes.
It's in Riyadh.
Yes.
Basically, the entire northern half, which also houses the major population centers of Yemen, are now controlled by Houthis. Everyone wants to keep the Red Sea open. If you want to keep the Red Sea open, Bab el-Mandeb should be open because that's the gateway. And the Houthis are saying that, excuse me, I have the capacity to shut it down.
Are the Houthis primarily in solidarity with Iran, or are they using the Iran war to achieve their own ambitions against Saudi Arabia?
We all are already suffering because of this war, and this war is escalating horizontally. If it goes on, it will be really, really bad for the global economy, no doubt about it.
Yemen has spent more than a decade at the center of one of West Asia's most devastating wars. But today, the country is no longer just the site of a civil war. As the conflict widens, Yemen's strategic geography has suddenly become even more important. The country sits astride the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, one of the world's most important maritime choke points, while its long-running conflict has drawn in Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the United States, as well as other regional powers. So, how did Yemen get here? Who exactly are the Houthis, and how closely are they tied to Iran? What does their growing military role mean for the future of Yemen and for the wider balance of power in West Asia? In this episode of Global Faultlines, we look at Yemen, its divided history, the rise of the Houthis, its transformation into a regional battleground, and what the current Iran war could mean for a country already facing a devastating humanitarian crisis. I'm Sharmada Venkata Subramanian, and joining me once again is Stanley Johny, the Hindu's International Affairs editor. Welcome back to another episode of Global Faultlines.
Thank you.
We're going to be discussing Yemen, but before that, this is our 25th episode.
Yeah.
So,
That's nice, and thanks to all our audience
Yes.
for sticking with us.
Definitely. Before we start talking about the role of Yemen in the recent conflicts and all that, when we talk about Yemen, it is usually described as a country that's caught in the middle of a civil war, but the roots of its crisis go much deeper.
Yeah.
So, for much of the 20th century, the country was divided between a conservative Republican North and a socialist South, which was the only Marxist state in the Arab world, until they unified in 1990. But even that unification did not really resolve the political, economic, and regional divisions between the two.
Yeah.
So, can you quickly walk us through the history of Yemen, the North-South divide, the unification, and its terrible aftermaths, and how that shaped the country as we know it today?
Yeah, there is a, broad and deep historical framework to understand Yemen's current predicaments. The divisions in Yemen which we are talking about today, Houthis and Yemen's Saudi-backed government, the Sunni government, and the Southern Transitional Council in Aden. So the roots of these divisions actually go back to, let's say, 19th century. Those were historical and those were also colonial. It's very broad, but I'll touch upon the key flashpoints of Yemen's history.
Right.
For example, yes, Yemen was divided. Southern Yemen was the Democratic Republic of Yemen, which was the communist state, and northern Yemen was the Arab Republic of Yemen. This is the post-war setup. But before that, and the entire Arabian Peninsula was controlled by the Ottomans, right? That doesn't mean that the Ottomans were directly ruling over, but they the local rulers in this region, they had declared their loyalty to the Sultan, which was the case in Central Arabia as well, right? Mecca and Medina were controlled by the Hashemite family, but until the First World War, they had also declared their allegiance to the Ottoman Sultan. So likewise, in Yemen, northern Yemen, which was ruled by Zaidi noblemen. So Zaidis are Shias. So it's an offshoot of Shiaism.
Yeah.
So there are liturgical or jurisprudential differences between 12-hour Shiaism, which is followed by the Iranians, and Zaidi Shiaism, which is followed by the Yemenis. But still they belong to that big tent, right? So there was this Zaidi Khanate in northern Yemen. After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century, the Zaidi Khanate would assert their control. They would have their their own regime in the northern Yemen. Whereas in the South was taken over by the British in mid-19th century. Like the British had established themselves as a major naval power in the Persian Gulf because they wanted to protect the sea routes. They also wanted to protect India, which was their, jewel in their crown. So if you look at the Persian Gulf, and the Persian Gulf coast, the British Navy was a very powerful force, right, in the 19th century. And because of the same reason, they had captured Aden in southern Yemen, which is also a coastal city, in 1839, if I am not mistaken. So in the south, basically southern Yemen was under the British control. It became a British protectorate. And Britain continued to exercise their control in southern Yemen until the late 1960s. So northern Yemen, after the Ottomans collapsed, it became an independent khanate. And in 1932, we know the modern Saudi Arabia was established. And the Saudis and the Republic of Yemen had established very close cooperation. So northern Yemen, conservative, yes. And then they maintained very good relationship with Saudi Arabia. So they were deeply ingrained into that emerging Arab world. Whereas in the south, it continued to be a British colony. And in the late 1960s, Britain decided to exit the Persian Gulf region because mainly they lost the Suez War, or rather not lost, but they faced a massive setback in the Suez War because the Americans and the Soviets had turned against Israel. They've lost the initiative, and then the British and the French realized that they did not hold the kind of influence in the Persian Gulf region that they once did. So this was a wake-up call, and Britain also lost India. So they lost the rational calculus to continue to be present in the region. And Britain also suddenly, they lost their empires, so they became a small island nation, right? They didn't have the resources to continue to retain their presence. So late 1960s, Britain exited the region, as a result of which today you have the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, etc., as independent countries, right? Earlier they used to be called Trucial Emirates because the British called them Trucial Emirates. They were under the British control. So by late 1960s, Britain exited the Persian Gulf region. So in Yemen, basically the Republicans, more progressive Republican forces captured power in Yemen. And in 1970, they turned Yemen into the Democratic Republic of Yemen, which is the Marxist state. So they declared that Marxism, communism would be their ideology, and they wanted to pursue stronger ties with the Soviet Union. And they had established strong ties with the Soviet Union. So now the split has been formalized. You have two Yemens, one people, two Yemens, and northern Yemen is the Republic of Yemen with closer ties with the Arab world, and southern Yemen is the People's Republic of Yemen, ruled by a Marxist regime with closer ties with the Soviet Union. And Saudi Arabia was very close to the Americans, and northern Yemen was attached with Saudi Arabia, so they belonged to that camp. So you see the reflections of the Cold War in Yemen as well, right? But it's very interesting that towards the end of the 1980s, the Soviet Union started losing its grip. They lost Afghanistan. They were forced to pull back from Afghanistan in 1989. And Afghanistan was also a Muslim majority country. And the Saudis and the Pakistanis were fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. They practically forced the Soviets to withdraw in February 1989. So that was largely seen even in Yemen, that the Soviet empire was kind of receding, if not collapsing, right? And southern Yemen had their own problems. Internal problems were there, deep economic issues were there. And southern Yemen and northern Yemen had fought multiple wars in the 1970s and in the 1980s. And both were economically in bad shape. So this, particularly after the Soviets were forced to withdraw from Afghanistan, there were greater incentives for both leadership. Northern Yemen was ruled by Ali Abdullah Saleh. Ali Abdullah Saleh, he was the leader for a long period of time until recently 2011. And southern Yemen was ruled by Ali Salem, who was the communist leader. These two, they came together. They started a series of negotiations aimed at unifying Yemen. And the regional developments, including the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, also pushed them to explore other opportunities, right, other options. And the Soviet Union, Afghanistan was only the beginning, right? Towards the end of the 1989, the pro-Soviet republics in Eastern Europe would start collapsing one after another.
Yeah.
Poland and Romania and others. And by early 1990s, you would lose the Soviet Union itself. Soviet Union would disintegrate in 1991, which means, it had remarkable impact across the region. So towards the late 1980s, by 1990, southern Yemenis realized that the Soviet Union was no longer the kind of power they were dependent on. The economic assistance was receding. The political backing was receding. So they moved forward reunification. So the reunification was actually shaped by these developments. So in 1990, yes, northern Yemen and southern Yemen came together, and Ali Abdullah Saleh would become the president of the United Yemen, and Ali Salem would become the vice president. So there was political integration at the top, but there was no social or political integration at the lower level.
Right.
So the divisions continued to persist.
So now let's quickly talk about the Houthis. They were initially formed as a Zaidi revivalist movement,
Yeah.
but soon they evolved into a very powerful political and military actor in the region. After a decade of war with Saudi Arabia, they now have missiles, drones, and the capacity to affect shipping far from Yemen as well.
Yeah.
So how did the Houthis transform from being a Yemeni insurgency to becoming a crucial, regional military actor, and how much of that transformation was due to Iran?
So Iran enters at a later stage. So many Western analysts I have noticed that Houthis, whenever they talk about Houthis, they would say Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthis.
Yes.
Iran's proxies in Yemen, etc., etc. This comes out of a misunderstanding or lack of understanding.
Right.
Because the Houthis, unlike Hezbollah, in the case of Hezbollah, at least you can say that the Iranians played a major role in the creation of Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And Houthis, no. Houthis emerged, as you pointed out, as an internal revivalist movement among the Zaydis in Yemen. I don't think the Iranians, or I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that the IRGC played a role in the creation of Houthis. And the Houthis also, it's Ansarallah, right? They are called Houthis because their leader was Muhammad Hussain Badruddin al-Houthi.
Yeah.
He was killed. Followers of Badruddin al-Houthi are called Houthis, but the movement's name is Ansarallah.
Yeah.
So, clearly there is misunderstanding or lack of understanding about the origins of the Houthis. But again, you place the rise of the Houthis in the context of Yemen's unification. So, Yemen was unified. After Yemen was unified, the southern Marxists lost whatever influence they had. There were lingering tensions, and in the south, I think in 1994, the southern militia leaders would revolt against Sana'a because they realized that, or they thought that the unification is not going as per the plan. So they took up arms against Sana'a, but then this time Sana'a would crush them. So they would treat this as a rebellion, as a civil war, and they would crush them, right? And Saudis would support the government in Sana'a because Saudi Arabia did not want a hostile force to take over power in southern Yemen,
Right.
because they thought that Yemen, anyway, Yemen is just south of Saudi Arabia, so they want a planned regime in Sana'a, so they helped the government. So there was a deepening Saudi influence in Yemen, and sections of the Zaidi population, and they are Shias, right?
Yeah.
They were not very happy with that because northern Yemen was largely seen as Zaidi territory. They kind of look at it, and then and they also saw a deepening cultural influence, like influence of the Saudi type Wahhabism among Yemenis, especially Yemen Sunnis. Because you look at the demography of Yemen, I think the current population could be roughly 5 crore people, roughly. There is no census. It's very difficult to get exact numbers. But of this 4 to 5 crore, 40 to 50 million people, roughly 45% are Shias, Zaidis, and 55% are Sunnis. So it's almost equally divided, right? So Zaidis are not a pushover like in many other countries. The Shias, they make up a smaller minority. So look at the case of Saudi Arabia. 15 to 20% are Shias, but they are always steamrolled by the establishment.
Yeah.
But in the case of Yemen, that's not possible. They are a powerful community, especially in the north. And they were the Khanate. They were the rulers. right, for a long period of time. And it's interesting that Ali Abdullah Saleh himself is a Zaidi.
Right.
Not many people talk about it.
Yeah.
He was a Shia, but he established a government that worked very closely with the Saudis. And the Zaidis saw Saudi Arabia's deepening influence in the regime, in the Saleh regime. They also thought that the Zaidis were being discriminated against, sidelined by the new system that Ali Abdullah Saleh had overseen. So then they started this movement. The movement was, yes, this was an internal revivalist movement, which would turn out to be a political insurgency.
Right.
Because they wanted to reassert the Zaidi identity and their belief, and they wanted to revolt against Saudi Arabia's deepening influence and against the corruption and authoritarianism, or whatever they called, of the Ali Abdullah Saleh government, right? So it started as a revivalist movement, then it becomes a political insurgency, then it becomes an armed insurgency against the state. This is how it has evolved. This started in the early 1990s when Yemen was kind of battling with its own course. In early 1990s, the Houthi movement began, and it would take time for them to consolidate influence. And particularly in the north, among where the Zaidi population is, largely concentrated, that's where they will build their base.
Right.
And some of the military operations the Yemeni government would carry out, killing the Houthi leaders, that also turned out to be counterproductive. That allowed Ansarullah deepen their influence, strike a chord with the Zaidi population, because their fundamental argument is that we are being discriminated by the state, and now our leaders are being killed by the security forces. So this helped them mobilize support, right? And then I would say the catalyst was the 2011 protest, the Arab Spring protest, which would start in 2010 December in Tunisia, spread to Egypt, Libya, Syria, and then Yemen, and also to Bahrain. In Bahrain, the Saudis would crush it anyway. In Libya, NATO will come and liberate the Libyans, quote-unquote liberation. In Syria, would fall into civil war, and then finally that would lead to Al-Qaeda, one former Al-Qaeda guy taking over power. In Tunisia and Egypt, governments would collapse, but eventually the military would come back to power. You look at the net effect of the Arab Spring, it was disastrous. And in the case of Yemen, okay, Arab Spring can be a separate episode altogether. But in the case of Yemen, this was a major catalyst because on the one side, anger towards establishment rulers was spreading across the Arab streets, including in Yemen, because Saleh was in power for 40 years. And Yemen remained a very poor country, one of the poorest countries in the Arab world.
Right.
And unemployment was very high. There was simmering anger among the public, especially among the youth, right? So on the one side, you have this public discontent towards Saleh, and on the other side, you have this Houthi movement against Saleh's regime. So the Houthis sensed an opportunity in the Arab Spring protests.
Right.
So they turned their military insurgency into a large-scale public movement against Saleh's government. And Saleh's response was to crush the protest, which only made things worse. And the Houthis gained more and more support. And they started marching towards Sana'a. So Saleh finally, and Saudi Arabia realized that they have to sacrifice Saleh to preserve the regime, because their interest in preserving the regime, they saw danger in the movement of the Houthis, because they thought that if the Houthis take over power, Houthis are Shias, and they will have strong ties with the Iranians, so which means Saudi Arabia's interests would be under check. So they didn't want that to happen. So what the Saudis would do, they would sacrifice Saleh. Saleh would be forced to quit. And then Abdul Rabb Mansour al-Hadi would be brought as Yemen's president. So Mansour al-Hadi would establish a government in Yemen. And this government had never been in Yemen. This government has always been based in Riyadh, even today. And this is what people call Yemen's internationally recognized government. Whenever I see that in New York Times, I mean, come on, who are you kidding? No? Yemen's internationally recognized government is not in Yemen. It's in Riyadh. I mean, that's the funny part. Anyway, we come across a lot of these things when you understand international politics. But the Saudis established this government, but this government was very weak. And the Houthis had momentum on their side. They had the support of the Zaidi population. They would continue to march. And in 2014, September, they would take over Sana'a. They would take over the capital, right? So ever since this government, the Saudi-backed government, that would shift towards Riyadh. Mansour al-Hadi is no longer the president. I think in 2022, the Saudis realized that this man is kind of good for nothing. He's not able to do anything. They would force him out. And then Mohammed al-Alimi, I think Alimi is the current chairman of the Presidential Leadership Council. Okay, they come up with all kind of names. But this is also based in Riyadh. This is not based in Yemen.
Yes.
And this is what everybody calls internationally recognized government. But Alimi is the head of this government today. But effectively the Houthis, they captured Sana'a and they started from Sada in the north. Now they are in Sana'a. And basically the northern hilly region would completely, northern and northwestern region would come under the Houthi control, and then they would extend their influence towards the Red Sea coast.
Right.
They would take over Hodeidah.
Yeah.
Hodeidah port is now controlled by them. So basically the entire northern half, which also houses the major population centers of Yemen, are now controlled by Houthis. So this is how Houthis, this is the long arc of the transformation of Ansarullah, which started as a revivalist movement into what they are today.
Right. And one of the biggest changes in the role of Houthis in West Asia happened after October 7th, when they joined the Gaza war, attacking Israel as well as commercial shipping on the Red Sea.
Yeah.
So what did that campaign reveal about the Houthis' strategic capabilities? And is controlling the Red Sea effectively their biggest regional leverage?
So first, the question is, why did they attack Israel?
Yes.
After October 7? Hezbollah did that. The Houthis also did that. I think, yes, two things. One, the Houthis became much more confident by that time because they were controlling more territories. And once they got Sana'a, once they became government, which means the previous Yemen government's ammunition depot, military infrastructure, ballistic missiles, everything became Houthis.
Right.
So what was an insurgent movement now became a territorial army.
Yeah.
That's what happened after they captured Sana'a, right? What was a ragtag militia is now Yemen's military force. That's how they transformed. And here Iran enters the picture. You asked about Iran.
Yes.
And Iran also sensed that this is a great opportunity. They of course have close cultural ties. Now the Houthis are sitting in Yemen, in Sana'a. So Iran, definitely there are evidence to suggest that the Iranians supported them, provided them ballistic missile parts, and helped them with the drone capabilities, anti-ship missiles, and also in military training and shared intelligence with them. So you will see from 2014 onwards very strong relationship between the Iranians and the Houthis. This will also spook the Saudis. In 2015, Saudi Arabia will start a war against the Houthis, right? And in 2015, they would start bombing Yemen. And that war went on. At that time, Saudi Arabia and the UAE were on the same side. And Saudi Arabia has superior air power compared to Houthis. Yemen doesn't have air power.
Yeah.
But the Houthis responded asymmetrically. They knew that, okay, they may not be able to defeat the Saudi force in a face-to-face battle. But they can turn the war painful for Saudi Arabia. They started attacking Saudi Arabia's oil facilities. They started attacking Saudi Arabia's border regions, right? And they also started using Red Sea for their leverage.
Yes.
Because with the drones and anti-ship missiles, the Houthis realized that they can actually operate based on what we call, anti-access operations. So anti-area access. So they may not be able to take over control of the entire Red Sea, but they can clearly say that I can turn traffic through Red Sea highly risky using my weapons.
Yes.
Which means they are denying that area for commercial tankers, which the Houthis can do.
Yeah.
So that is a great leverage for them. So this is how they built their military capabilities, particularly after the Saudis attacked them. And then after October 7, what the Houthis did, by that time they had that confidence, right? Because the Saudis, when they started the war, they wanted to drive the Houthis out of Sana'a.
Yeah.
That didn't happen. And the Saudis finally realized that with air force alone, they are not able to do that. The Houthis on the other side only expanded their control, territorial control. And the Saudi-backed government never managed to establish its authority inside Yemen.
Yeah.
So the Saudis then finally cut a deal with the Houthis in 2022 and 23. So Houthis became more confident. And then what they saw when Israel started this war against Palestinians in Gaza, in the aftermath of the Hamas attack against Israel, the Houthis, by declaring war against Israel, by joining this conflict, the Houthis started mobilizing support at home because everybody wanted to mobilize support at home, right? Houthis are seen as what do we call a sectarian force.
Yeah.
And in a country which is 50-50 divided almost, in fact 45 to 55%, so 55% are Sunnis.
Yeah.
When the Houthis became the government, they did not want to be seen as a sectarian Zaidi Shia militia group. Rather, they wanted to establish themselves as the new ruler of the entire of the whole Yemen.
Yeah.
And the Palestine question is not a Shia question, right? Palestinians are Sunnis.
Yes.
So, by joining the war in favor of the Palestinians against Israel, the Houthis were kind of expanding their support base inside the country.
Right.
It was also a political move. And they were also sending a message to other countries in the region because mostly Arab Sunni countries, okay, they have problems with Israel, but none of them take up arms against Israel. They do not want to join a war with Israel in defense of the Palestinians, right? The Saudis will never do that. The Emiratis are very close, partners of Israel. Nobody else wants to fight the Israelis on behalf of the Palestinians.
Yeah.
But the Houthis on the other side are saying that we are ready to do that. So that's what the Houthis did. And how the Americans responded to this is also interesting. The United States started bombing the Houthis. And the Houthis kind of shut down the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
Yes.
And then Trump would bomb them for a month or something. And then he would declare victory and then back off because he realized that it's not possible to bomb them.
Yeah.
So when Trump started bombing them, we wrote an editorial in the Hindu saying that the Saudis tried this for 15 years. All the best. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
But Trump realized it in a month that he is not able to defeat these guys because they are deeply entrenched. And the Palestine issue, I think the Houthis used it to mobilize, deepen their support at home.
Right.
They are now the government controlling northern and northwestern Yemen. They definitely, through anti-area, anti-access operations, they have established their hold over the Red Sea, traffic, which means, they can shut down Bab el-Mandeb. Bab el-Mandeb is a very, very, very important strait. You have written about it. So Bab el-Mandeb connects Red Sea through the Gulf of Aden, and Gulf of Aden opens into the Arabian Sea. And Bab el-Mandeb is the choke point in the south and Suez Canal is in the north.
Yes.
And if you are shutting Bab el-Mandeb, you are effectively shutting down the traffic between Asia and Europe.
Yes.
And the tankers will have to take the Cape of Good Hope route, the route which Christopher Columbus had taken centuries ago, which means your insurance cost is going up.
Yes.
Your fuel costs are going up, which means everything is going up.
Yes.
All the prices are going up. Risks are also going up. So everyone wants to keep the Red Sea open.
Yeah.
And if you want to keep the Red Sea open, Bab el-Mandeb should be open because that's the gateway. And the Houthis are saying that, excuse me, I have the capacity to shut it down. So you better behave with us.
Right.
This is their message.
Yeah. Of course, the recent confrontation in Iran has only taken this transformation further. The Houthis initially signaled support for Iran, but they have eventually ended up attacking with direct confrontation with Saudi Arabia, attacking Saudi airports, shipping, military targets, and recently the Jazan refinery as well. So first of all, why this escalation? And moreover, are the Houthis primarily in solidarity with Iran, or are they using the Iran war to sort of achieve their own ambitions against Saudi Arabia?
So I think there is very strong coordination between the Iranians and the Houthis, clearly. And many people had asked this question right from the beginning of the Iran war in February 2026, why the Houthis are not joining the war. Hezbollah had joined the war. Hashad had attacked American military presence in Iraq. But the Houthis never fired a shot in this part. Many thought that the Houthis will shut down Bab el-Mandeb. That didn't happen. And this also triggered debates. Some people had even asked questions like whether Iran still controls the Houthis. You had all kind of debates online. But I always believed that the Houthis acted as a check on the Saudis. Because during the course of the war, Iran war, the Iranians were attacking all the Persian Gulf monarchies, including Saudi Arabia. And these Persian Gulf monarchies did not retaliate in kind. Okay, there are reports that some of them had fired some drones, carried out some airstrikes, but there was no massive coordinated retaliatory attack on Iran by these countries.
Right.
Of course, the Americans bombed Iran, but not the Persian Gulf countries. They continue to get hit by the Iranians, but they exercised restraint, or rather they were scared of the consequences. And the Houthis here acted as a major deterrent because the Saudis knew that Iran has an escalation option.
Right.
If the Saudis joined the war, if they attacked Iran, the Houthis, nobody knows what they were going to do.
Right.
Remember in 2019, when Donald Trump was putting his, what do we call, maximum pressure campaign on Iran. It was the first Trump administration. The Houthis attacked a Saudi oil refinery and knocked off half of Saudi Arabia's oil production capacity for 1 week. So they have that capacity. So the Saudis knew this. So the Houthis actually acted as a deterrent against any possible Saudi attack on Iran, right? This, I think, worked throughout the 40 days of bombing. But what happened was that during the second phase of the war, which started in July first week, after the Memorandum of Understanding collapsed. So, I mean, just keep the dates in mind. February 28, the war began. April 8, you had the ceasefire. June 17, the Memorandum of Understanding was signed. But then in early July, the Memorandum of Understanding was collapsing. And Donald Trump would start his second wave of bombing on Iran. And Iran was retaliating. So you have a tit-for-tat strike attacks throughout the first 2 weeks of July, right? And it was this time the Saudis did something really, really foolish. They attacked an airport in Yemen, the Sana'a airport, Houthi-controlled airport in Yemen. The Saudis didn't say that they attacked it. The Saudis said that the Yemeni government attacked it, the Riyadh-based Yemeni government. I don't know who attacked it, but the attack came from Saudi Arabia, right? And this instigated the Houthis. Again, it still remains a mystery why the Saudis did that. And it's interesting that after Saudis did this, a week after Saudis carried out the attack, the United States announced the Saudi-U.S. nuclear cooperation agreement. So I don't know whether the Saudis came under American pressure to join the war, to attack the Houthis, or whether the Saudis actually believed that they can use their air power to neutralize Houthis, whether their, assessment of risks has changed. You don't have a clarity about these things, but what you know is that the Saudis carried out this attack. This gave a perfect excuse to the Houthis to retaliate. Until then, they exercised restraint. And the larger picture is that the Americans were now carrying out the second phase of attack, and the Iranians had shut down the Strait of Hormuz. So then here the Houthis say that they will also join the war, not against the Americans, not against Israel, but against Saudi Arabia. So they started attacking Saudi Arabia. Not just that, they also announced a maritime blockade on Saudi Arabia's Red Sea ports. And this is very, very detrimental because after the Strait of Hormuz was closed, Saudi Arabia had moved much of its exports to its Red Sea ports, especially to Yanbu, right? Because Persian Gulf is closed. The Saudis are not finding it, they are not able to get their ships out of the Hormuz Strait because of the Iranian blockade. But Saudis have an east-west pipeline connecting their oil fields in the east with their ports in the west on the Red Sea coast. So they started moving oil excessively from the eastern coast to the western coast, and then using the export terminals in the western coast to send them out to Asia. So which means these ships, after being loaded with oil, crude oil and other petroleum products, will have to, if they are moving to Asia, they will have to pass the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. If they are going to Europe, okay, they can take the Suez Canal route. So if they have to take the Bab el-Mandeb route, they are within the Houthi firing range. So the Houthis are saying that they are imposing a blockade on Saudi ports, which means no Saudi ship, no Saudi flagged ship, or no ships that are calling at the Saudi ports will be allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So which also meant that Saudi Arabia is not able to send their oil out. Strait of Hormuz is closed. Now Bab el-Mandeb is also closed. So Houthis have actually, they started tightening the screws on Saudi Arabia. They started attacking Saudi Arabia. This is their way of joining the war. So this was triggered by the Saudi attack, which in my view was extremely reckless, if not foolish.
Yeah.
That dragged the Houthis also into the war. And now we are talking about a regional war.
Yes.
And it's also very interesting, after the Houthis imposed the blockade and started attacking Saudi Arabia, Trump immediately stopped attacking Iran.
Right.
Because Trump had also announced a threat on Truth Social saying that if the Houthis do not behave, I am going to teach them a lesson, etc., etc. But the Houthis are still not behaving.
Yes.
Even today, before we started this conversation, they attacked another Saudi ship in the Red Sea. No, the Americans, I don't think, are not in a mood to join this war.
Right.
So the Saudis are now left with themselves. They will have to tackle this problem. So they are kind of in trouble now, because, okay, they are also attacking the Houthis, but the Houthis are, the problem is Yemen is an impoverished country. Saudis can attack Yemen, but the Houthis are ready to absorb the pain.
Right.
But the Houthis on the other side see a highly target-rich country.
Right.
They can attack the oil infrastructure, and they can attack the border regions, and Saudi Arabia will come under enormous military and economic pressure. They should have thought through this.
And going along the same track that we were discussing now, I think this is an extraordinary strategic situation because, like you mentioned, Yemen and Iran are cooperating with each other. Rather, the Houthis and the Iranian government, they are cooperating with each other. Iran is in control of the Strait of Hormuz, while the Houthis are threatening to control both Bab el-Mandeb as well as the Red Sea. So how crucial is this for the global economy, and is Iran sort of using the Houthis and Yemen as a backup to affect the global economy and the maritime traffic?
No, there is clearly coordination between these two, but the Houthis have their own interests as well.
Right.
For example, the Houthis are now saying that the Saudis had imposed a blockade on Yemen, and they wanted the Saudi blockade to be lifted. Only then they will remove the blockade on Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And because the Houthis see that Iran's closure of Strait of Hormuz has turned Saudi Arabia increasingly dependent on Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which means Saudi Arabia is now more vulnerable. So Houthis are trying to use that leverage to put more pressure on Saudi Arabia, so that they think that they can exact more concessions from Saudi Arabia.
Right.
So the Houthis are doing this not only for Ayatollah Mushtaba Khamenei.
Yeah.
They are doing this for themselves as well. But there is what we call convergence of interest between the Iranians and the Houthis here.
Right.
So we can also look at the map, no? Iran is on the one side and Yemen is here. And Saudi Arabia's, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, you have the Persian Gulf. And on the left side of Saudi Arabia, you have the Red Sea.
Right.
So Bab el-Mandeb, you can draw a straight line from Bab el-Mandeb to Strait of Hormuz. And both lines can join in Iran. So
Right.
this is a triangle. You will get a triangle. But this is a triangle, but you also have a biangular blockade. This is not a triangular blockade,
Yeah.
but it's a biangular blockade, because Strait of Hormuz is closed. Bab el-Mandeb is closed for the Saudis,
Yeah.
right? So there is fair amount of coordination between these two. And the coordination also means that, the Yemenis are not doing this only for the Iranians. They think that Saudi Arabia is now increasingly dependent on Bab el-Mandeb Strait. This gives them additional leverage,
Right.
the Houthis.
Right.
And they seem determined to use that leverage. And that's what is happening now. This is beneficial for Iran because, before the war, Strait of Hormuz was used for, 1/5 of the global seaborne oil exports, right? And let's say some 20 million barrels of oil pass through the strait every day. And Bab el-Mandeb, 4 to 5 million barrels of oil pass through Bab el-Mandeb every day. But Bab el-Mandeb is crucial not only for oil. Bab el-Mandeb is the gateway of an important trading route or trading link between Europe and Asia.
Yeah.
Everything passes through the Red Sea.
Yes.
Not just oil, automobiles,
Yeah.
machinery, your consumer goods. Whatever trade is being done between Europe and Asia,
Yes.
it goes through the Red Sea.
Yeah.
So it has to cross the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and then it has to cross the Suez Canal, and then it should enter the Mediterranean Sea and sail further towards Europe, right? So if Bab el-Mandeb is closed, the Houthis are saying it's not closed. It's closed only for Saudis.
Right.
But if Bab el-Mandeb is also closed, it will push the global economy to the cliff, right? So it's not good news for the global economy.
Yeah.
We all are already suffering because of this war. And this war is escalating horizontally from the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea. And if it continues to, if it goes on, it will be really, really bad for the global economy, no doubt about it.
Right. And also, the recent conflict is also sort of threatening to disrupt the relative peace that Yemen experienced after the 2022 truce. So, is it safe to say that this is the beginning of a return to the Yemen war itself, or are we looking at something different where the internal conflicts in Yemen have become inseparable from the wider US, Iran, Saudi Arabia confrontation?
So yes, the tensions have escalated within Yemen. Even today, the Houthis are now bombing the areas controlled by their opponents.
Yeah.
And in southern Yemen, there is the Southern Transitional Council, which is backed by the UAE. So you look at today's Yemen, there are three major actors. Houthis control much of Yemen. And then you have this Presidential Leadership Council, Saudi-backed entity, and then the UAE-backed entity. Houthis are the dominant actor, but tensions exist. And these three factions are controlling different pockets of Yemen. So the current war has escalated the tensions. Why? Because, after the Houthis joined the war, or after the Saudis bombed Houthis, the Saudis, I think, are using the Presidential Leadership Council, the Saudi-backed government, to attack the Houthi position from land. And the Houthis are now retaliating. So the larger tension here is the Saudi-Houthi rivalry, which is now being translated into a ground battle between these two governments, these two political entities. So I think tensions are likely to continue. They may not settle this anytime soon. And Houthis are not going anywhere, right? And they have already expanded their territorial control. So the best we can hope for is, if there is a ceasefire between the Saudis and the Houthis, then there could be a ceasefire between the Presidential Leadership Council and the Houthi leadership.
Right.
The Houthi leadership is called Mahdi al-Hashad, Mahdi al-Mashad. So if there is, so for that you actually need a regional ceasefire, which can bring a ceasefire into the internal tensions as well. But the internal tensions are not going to go away because these are structural problems.
Right.
They're not going to go away because in the south, they wanted southern Yemen to be an independent entity now, the Southern Transitional Council. But this Saudi-backed government believes that they are the legitimate rulers of the entire Yemen. But I don't think they can defeat the Houthis. They are the most entrenched force now. So these are deep structural problems, and these problems are not going to go away, which means tensions and conflict will persist. But at the same time, you can hope for a ceasefire. For that has to start at the top and then translated into the bottom.
Right. So that brings us to the end of our discussion on Yemen for this episode. But like we had mentioned in our previous episode where we discussed about Jordan, we have a couple of questions from our audience. So let's quickly address that. So Vishak Ram Mohan has asked, how strong is the economy of Jordan in comparison with other East Asian or GCC countries, and how has the US-Iran war affected it? Also, has there been any major internal conflicts in Jordan that has triggered the kingdom's apprehensions of a threat against it?
So Jordan's economy has its own problems. I think we briefly talked about in the episode. Thanks to Vishak, first of all, for the question. Unlike if you compare Jordan with GCC countries, UAE or Saudi Arabia, Jordan doesn't have natural resources like the Saudis or the Emiratis or Qataris have, right? The economy is excessively reliant on tourism.
Right.
Because especially Petra, places like, and Dead Sea, beautiful places. I myself I've been to Jordan. It's a fantastic place. So they are overtly dependent on tourism. And then for external aid contributions, the United States provides aid assistance to Jordan every year, billions of dollars. So the economy it's a highly delicate balancing act for the Jordanian administration. Unemployment is very high, and there are deep resentment, sometimes economic resentment among the public towards the government. And the war, he's also asking about the war, and the war made it worse because we know that after the war, a lot of countries who are dependent on energy imports were impacted, including us, including India. So Jordan was also impacted. Shipping cost went up, and Jordan is effectively a landlocked country, right? It has narrow access, but still. So shipping cost will go up. It did go up. Energy prices did go up. And then the war had an impact on tourism.
Right.
And which means that would affect Jordan very badly. And most important, this had an impact on Jordan's security, because in the second phase of the war, we talked about it in detail.
Yes.
Jordan was repeatedly attacked by the Iranians. And Jordan has a very particular, very important geographical location, which is its blessing, but it is also its curse.
Yes.
So Iranians are now trying to exploit this curse part, right? So yeah, I mean, to conclude, economy has its own problems. Politically stable Jordan is, but economically very vulnerable to external shocks, and it is now facing a lot of shocks.
Right.
Yes, the government is trying to manage those shocks, but it is still facing doldrums. And about internal opposition in Jordan, I don't think there is any civil strife. At least we are not seeing anything. But protests are there, cycles of protests are there. These protests are largely driven by economic concerns. And the government had either negotiated with them or crushed them. So they managed to withstand these challenges and to ensure their own stability, which is what the Jordanians have done. I think a couple of years ago, there were concerns about some kind of rift between the king and his half-brother.
Right.
So there was a major palace dispute early, I think 2021 or 22, but that is also now resolved, apparently, according to the palace.
Right.
So, I mean, at least when you look at Jordan, you don't see any major threat to stability, but at the same time, there are a lot of issues, and which Jordan continues to grapple with.
Right. And next, Kivalur Swaminathan has asked, how much territory has Jordan lost to Israel in 70 plus years, and how have they handled that?
Yeah, thanks to the question. So Jordan, when we talk about Jordan's loss of territory, Jordan hasn't lost territory as such, okay? But briefly, just look at it. In 1948, when the State of Israel was created, within Palestine, Jordan would capture the West Bank, which was a Palestinian territory, East Jerusalem, which includes the holy city, right? And the Egyptians would take over Gaza. That's what happened. And what the Jordanians would do, they would later, they would annex West Bank and East Jerusalem. And they would give citizenship to the Palestinian people. So technically speaking, West Bank and East Jerusalem became Jordanese territory. And they would lose these territories in the 1967 war.
Right.
But these are Palestinian territories, actually, historically speaking, Palestinian territories, which the Jordanians had captured and annexed, and they lost it to the Israelis. And from 1967 onwards, the Israelis are controlling and occupying these territories, including East Jerusalem. So Jordanians lost the territory they had captured, but they haven't lost the territory where the Kingdom of Jordan was established with the blessings of the British. I think, yeah, we talked about the establishment of Jordan in the previous episode, but this is what happened. Thanks to the question anyway.
Right. That brings us to the end of this episode as well. Thanks to our audience for the questions. If you have any questions about today's episode, anything related to Yemen, please leave it in the comments below. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yemen's story is, in many ways, a story of how a domestic conflict can become entangled with the wider geopolitics of an entire region. The Houthis are no longer simply one of the parties to Yemen's civil war. Their control of territory, their missile and drone capabilities, and their ability to threaten shipping have given them an influence far beyond Yemen's borders. And as the Iran war continues, Yemen is once again becoming a frontline in a much larger confrontation. And beneath all of that remains a population that has already endured years of war, displacement, hunger, and the collapse of basic services. Whether the current regional war ends in escalation or diplomacy, the question for Yemen will remain the same. Can the country ever reclaim its sovereignty and find a political settlement, or has its fragmentation become too deeply embedded in the new geopolitics of West Asia? That was Global Faultlines for this week. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any feedback or suggestions, write to us at podcasts@thehindu.co.in.